One detail that we are going to explain now is about capacitors. When we have to replace them, there are two important data that are exactly the ones that are printed on the capacitor, and we have to take into account when buying a replacement. These values, we have to respect different parameters. For example, let's explain about these ones that we have here. The manufacturer usually places capacitors that support a voltage 25% higher than the one that will normally work. What does this mean? You already know that in this area we have 220 volts in alternating current, but in reality the peak voltage to which it reaches is 310 volts. 25% more, we will multiply it by 1.25, and we are talking about 387 volts. The next value of capacitors, next standard value, is the value that the manufacturer will be placing. In this case, it can be seen that they have obtained 450 volts, so they have put 450 volt capacitors. In terms of capacity, when we are in areas of source that comes after rectification, which will fulfill their filtering function, the capacity must be equal or greater than the one we are seeing on the original board, because the more capacity it has, the better, the more it will filter. But there is a point at which physically the capacitor will not fit. In this case we have 2 of 10 microfarads. If I wanted to put twice the capacity of these capacitors by physical space, they will not fit me, but they will work well anyway. So, when we are in the filtering stage, we will place capacitors with voltage equal or higher than the one it originally has, and with respect to the capacity it must be equal or higher. Now, when we are in other parts of the board, such as for example in more delicate areas, including the switched mode power supply, from the capacitor that feeds the switch, in all other cases we already have to respect the values of the capacitor in terms of capacity, because if they absorb too much capacity it will not have remaining electrons to be able to deliver to the appliance they have to feed. For example, in the case of this capacitor, which feeds the switch, we have to respect its capacity very well. If we put it of greater capacity, the source will not work. Here we have a 50 volt 4.7 microfarad capacitor. Except in the filtering area, in the rest of the areas we have to respect the capacitor values to make the replacements. We always have to take into account those parameters. So, understanding this, we are also knowing the following. I will show you an external board so that you can see how these capacitors are. Look at this. These are 420 volt capacitors, but they are 100 microfarads. This filtering of the external board, like this rectification, which is produced with the rectifier, then a filtering is done to feed even the compressor and the fans. The capacitors are of more capacity to maintain the filtering of the wave, but they are bigger. Clearly it can be seen. This would work on this board, but physically it will not fit. Now, if I put this one here of less capacity, it will not work for me because it will not keep the wave. It will drop to 0 and it will not be able to feed the compressor properly. These data have to be taken into account when replacing the capacitors. These are the parameters that we will be following to make the correct replacements.